This is Shyft, Red Ankh, and you're listening to Music Existence.
Welcome to another instance of Music Existence, where because of music, we exist. With me, I have Shyft, an electronic music producer who has released music for over 2 decades under the eponymous moniker, blending genres like dark wave, gabber, and happy hardcore, and now has a new metal influence released with the project Red Ankh, which is simply titled Red. So, Shyft, Trachea, Vorga, Batida, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Happy to talk to the stuff.
Yeah. So, take me back to the very beginning. You started producing music when you were 14 years old, back in 2003. And was it a mostly self-taught approach at that time?
Very much so. And because of that, I was no child prodigy, very much so. Because of that, it was pretty terrible music, not gonna lie. But yeah, and I started the two projects at the same time. The electronic, the dancier stuff, probably a little bit beforehand, but in the same year, I wanted to make a hardcore, hardcore techno centered project with just all sorts of other influences as well. But that was at the core, and then I was really into metal, particularly like European, more like melodic metal at the time, and was doing whatever I could to make those cheap software synthesizers sound like guitars and stuff. But yeah, this is all pretty bizarre instrumental stuff for Red Ankh back then, and slowly working it into something that actually sounds more, like the metal parts sound more metal. It's not just, like a 303 synth that's distorted or something like that.
Right.
And and then blending more influences as they come. At some point I stopped being stubborn and actually started to teach myself, a little bit of theory. Stopped writing in the chromatic scale, and and grew up,
Yeah, you've done a lot of growing up. Your sound indeed has experienced a lot of growth, even within that same year. I mean, and even then, your stuff as Shyft really has some degree of competence, even if you were calling it terrible. There is something there, and I was wondering, in a 2003 sort of context, what sort of recording software were you using at the time?
The latest version of FL Studio, so they called it Fruity Loops back then. It's probably version 4, and I don't think was using anything externally back then. It would have just been all of the default stuff. Now, like the releases that you could find online from back then, is it what the I know Drudge is one that's readily available. The first one probably is too. I've rebuilt those since the beginning. I think I completely re-recorded them around 2008 or 2009. So if you're hearing them like on Bandcamp, still not up to my quality standards of today, but definitely more listenable than the teenager version.
Yeah, I mean, I did it based on your archive. You had the album Drudge, of course, what you're referring to, and then uh, Beat Shifter, and those were
the very first. Yep.
Yeah, those were like part of that kind of early history. So, I mean, did you know at the time, like, wow, like this sounds complete, or did you still think even then that you can do a lot more with it?
Oh, I'm pretty sure I was just as arrogant about that as I was about a lot of things as a as a rebellious teenager. I think I was very overconfident with the work at the time. I'd pump out an album, in a month or two and be like, oh, it's genius, it's done, let's move on, which is part of the reason why I did write so much music back then, is because I didn't put a whole lot of polish into it. Didn't know anything about mixing and mastering. It's just, you know, just pumping out the vibes.
Yeah. And again, there's that arrogant stubbornness, I think it's what you've mentioned in your bio, and you really just kind of did it all. And even with that sort of head first kind of energy, were there any highlight tracks from that era, from both albums, that you felt were like stronger songs?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. There's just so many names, though. Let me, just so I'm not fumbling here, let me bring up the list.
Sure.
Let's see here. Track 6 from Beat Shifter, Lady O. That was one that I did also, like it features again on the soundtrack that I did up of a fantasy novel that I wrote, that I wrapped up, finished the manuscript back in 2010. And that's, it's a lot of the themes, right? Like Lady O is a character, is the protagonist of that book. And I don't know, like growing up with video game music is probably my earliest inspirations for writing anything. There's, special place for me, right, for old like JRPGs, like Final Fantasy stuff, Nobuo Uematsu.
Sure.
Uh, and like with the games, it had like characters had their own themes, and it like set the mood for who they were, and I really liked that. So there's something that I dabbled in there. Um, let's see. Blood Grooves is one of the heavier ones. It's a little more, in the vein of the hardcore techno. Still pretty experimental and strange, but kind of leads toward my like actual hardcore project. Let's see, over on Drudge, we got the Harpist is another major character from that novel. So that's one of my favorites. That still feels good. Yeah, and there are a couple others that ended up on the soundtrack as well. Where the Battle of Werdrafe is another one of those theme songs. Ultra Adi, the opener track, same thing. Those are the ones that stand out for me on that album, Drudge. Aside from obviously the title track, which is still one of my all-time favorites.
It's cool that you've mentioned writing a novel, kind of alongside gathering all those ideas musically. And it made sense. It spoke to your intuitiveness to archive your material, because when you're that age and you're pumping out tracks, um, sometimes you don't have that much faith in your work, and you're like, like
Hmm.
whatever, and then you lose it, and then
Yeah.
you feel guilty, and then years later you're like, shit, I had like all these great songs like back in '03 or whenever, and I should have archived them, but man, you took that initiative to just keep going.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah. I feel pretty fortunate that I had the sort of like data hoarder mentality about all my projects. I never lost anything. Well, there was the very first like Red Ankh release, which can't be found anywhere today. The project files were corrupted, and I lost the whole thing. But yeah, everything else, fortunately, I've never lost. And yeah, it's definitely helped, right? Because like yeah, especially with those two first Shyft albums, the original recordings, there'd be like one, melody that'd be worth keeping, but it'd be this like 10-minute long progressive thing with just a bunch of trash in it. And so I could go back and, yeah, take out the bits that I like and rework it into something that suits my interests, whenever I did that. I think it was 2008 or so.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and whereas, yeah, like I know a lot of people, right, who are always lamenting about how, hard drive failure, or they deleted something because they were kind of embarrassed about it, but regretted it later. So,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it speaks to the era of the music because, you know, um, some people, like if you were to go like 10 years prior to that in like the early 90s, like they would have them on reels, and like
Hmm.
sometimes the reels would be lost to time, the tape reels, or like they'd
Well, they
be
could get
lost in like
damaged.
a fire or something, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sounds like a nightmare to me.
But yeah, but it's something because like imagine in future tense it's like, oh, look at these mysterious files I found on this old hard drive.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I even enjoy stumbling across, these like very obscure artists archiving their old stuff on, online, other very old, dated looking websites, and just to see what's going on. You can find a lot of cool stuff that way. A lot of trash also, of course, but
Yeah.
that's part of the process.
You mentioned archives, you mentioned dated, and when I think of that, and I miss this era a lot, as does my brother Will. We were reminiscing about the old days of Acid Planet.
Oh yes, where we
that's
met.
that's where we first heard you. When you did Blutenos disc, and you had
Yes.
This Is Gabber Bizop.
Yep.
That
And
was
it
the
topped the
jam.
charts of acid planets for a brief period. Yeah. So
Do you
cool.
remember that era?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very fun website, very fond memories as well. Will has a better memory for it than I do. So, but I depend on him for that because it was, yeah, a special time for me.
Yeah, and by 2005, you dove headfirst into Gabber. So,
Mhm.
what was your mindset for a Blutenos disc?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the bigger ideas behind it is just let's try to focus for once and like take one style and see if we can just stay focused instead of jumping all over, throwing in trance and techno and guitars or whatever, and see if I can actually produce a whole album with just that one idea. If I remember right, there's still a good amount of variety on there, but I managed to keep it within that one, what would you call it now? Probably like main style gabber or
Yeah.
whatever, millennium hardcore or something like that. Um, but yeah, so that was kind of the challenge for me at the time, is to stay focused. But otherwise, yeah, the idea, right, is big, overdriven kick drums, a variety of tempos, and then just, memorable anthemic melodies and goofy quotes from my favorite media at the time.
Yeah, and I think in a year later you did the your debut clowncore
Ah,
album, I Can
yeah.
Twist Too. And I
Yep.
think that quotes Batman and Robin. You quote Mr. Freeze, kick some
Yes.
ass.
Yep. Whole track on that. Probably a little heavy on the vocal samples there, but
So what was your
so many
mindset
good
for
one-liners.
clowncore and setting up that album? I Can Twist
Yeah.
Too.
So that one, yeah, that one's got a bit of a funny story because my buddy, a friend of mine that I learned how to do music stuff with back then, bouncing ideas off of each other and stuff. A local guy, we went to high school together. He hated my music after a while. Like after we first got into it, I was going in a certain vein, and he's like, your music, your melodies are so silly. It all sounds like carnival music. And so he started to call all of my music clowncore as kind of a joke. And I'm like, what's wrong with that? Why not clowncore? And so I leaned into it for that album. And yeah, and there's bits too from what is it? Batman Forever. There's the scene toward the beginning where Two-Face attacks that carnival. Nightmare under the big top or whatever he says. Massacre under the big top. And then yeah, using some like cheap sound font. I've never known how to say this word, Calliope. Those
It was
organs.
Calliope. Calliope.
Calliope. Thank you. Finally. Yeah, those kinds of organs for some breakdowns, really nailing the vibe, and yeah, to just give it a sort of like a creepy carnival tone overall.
I think, yeah, the Calliope organ track really is where that influence takes like full spectrum.
Good. I'm glad it stood out.
Yeah, and so you mentioned your first release of Red Ankh, unfortunately, meaning its premature demise. But from what I surmise, that rhymes. Um, we got.
We're all musicians here.
Yeah, we're all musicians here. We got to rhyme. 2010 was where I first heard of the first instance of it, which was Throw Me a Happycore record. And
yes, yeah.
yeah, so was that its debut?
No. The first, so yeah, the first album, the one that got corrupted, I still have MP3s
Oh,
somewhere,
okay.
but project files were lost. So
Oh man. Oh, the
that's
project.
gonna, the project files were lost. Yeah, so it can be heard. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not my best work, but so yeah, if someday I do want to remake that, I'm gonna have to do it by ear. But but yeah, the first Red Ankh album that's available that should be, yeah, it's on Bandcamp at the bottom, was 2004. But that was another one that I revamped, redid, uh, maybe around 2008, 2009. It'll probably tell you on there when I did it. Um, and yeah, so you can hear, if you start back that early, you can hear a lot more of the changes. It was totally instrumental back then. The songs are generally longer, had a more like maybe like Mike Oldfield style progression, where there's a lot of like repetition but with adding layers, but heavy. You can hear the distorted bass drums, probably right in track one on the 2004 album, the first 2004 album. I think I put out 3
Yeah.
that year. But yeah, so Glee Monster, the song that you're referencing on Throw Me a Happycore record, that one, I had a pretty, I guess, established style for the time. then. I mean, that was going back to, it's mostly instrumental. There's a bit of a scream, scream's the title of the track in there, but it's otherwise instrumental, and lead, and it's more like dance music heavy. So yeah, Red Ankh had been around for a while. Since then, I started recording my own vocals for it by that time.
Right, that makes more sense because, I mean, when you mentioned 2004, because you were definitely still into your writing at the time, incorporating characters, and Red Ankh and the Red Album is very character and story driven, and I was wondering about that process because by that point, when you released your newest release for Red Ankh, the instrumentation is a lot more, even though it's synthesized, it's a lot more naturalized. There's not just metal influence, there's a lot of rock influence too, like a lot of power chords, a lot of folkiness to it. And I was wondering, because you had initially wanted the Red Album to incorporate like this prog metal approach, but then it started to incorporate kind of folkier elements and industrial ones too. So when would you say the Red Album really took shape?
Well, I mean, it's probably in two stages because the songs, like the original composition for that album, is pretty old. I was writing most of the instrumentation back in 2006, 2007. So at that time, it was a lot of, I want to make, a prog album with some more, maybe kind of gothy, kind of symphonic elements in it, but was just throwing everything together like I always did back then. And, uh, and then it was kind of a, like which songs, fit this theme, Red, this kind of a synesthetic kind of theme.
Yeah, I love that.
And it, yeah, and even then, back then, I was very loose with how the songs were supposed to match up. So at that time, when I had like done the groundwork for almost all of the songs, I think 12 of the 13 songs, or 11 of the 13 songs. I had a certain, I was like, okay, this is how it's supposed to feel, but it was still very all over the place. There wasn't a lot gluing it together to give it this like heated red sound that I understand it to feel like now personally. So yeah, so it was all over the place. It wasn't as folky. I did switch over a lot of the instruments, added a lot of layers when I picked it up again about a couple of years ago, and then it was I sat down. It's like, okay, let's be serious now. If we want it to sound red, what does that really mean to me, and how do I glue that together? And I ended up doing that by selecting a lot of traditional folk instruments that
Where
had
did you get those instruments from?
yeah, so they're all digital. Some of them are
Are they like from like a software or something?
yeah, yeah. So like like the fiddle work. Well, it's a I don't think you'd refer to a viola as a fiddle, but like the folky stuff that's on the boats, the lower or like mid bowed string. That's a what is it? Physically modeled viola instrument. So it's all math, right? Like it sounds very convincing, very beautiful, a lot of
Right.
articulation, but it's very low processor speed, no samples to load. It's just some genius built that thing. And then yeah, a lot of them are there's some other virtual instruments there. There's like like I've got physically modeled hurdy-gurdy, bagpipes physically modeled. Um, but there's a mix, right? Like there are instruments that just nobody's figured it out yet, or there just isn't the money, the justification for making more bizarre instruments. So I'm relying on sample libraries for that. So like contact libraries.
Mm-hmm. And I like how the album flows. You got the first track, Orchest, which is very prog folky. then you have Perch the Mundane. And I was curious about this one because
Okay.
it has like the gabber and kind of metal influence that you've implemented before, but then you also use a Vocaloid. What was your thought process for like shaping this Vocaloid? Because I noticed when implementing that sort of software, there's a huge learning curve.
Yeah, and to be clear, once upon a time I was using Vocaloid software in Red Ankh. Um, Probably too early of a stage, right? I was very excited, new technology. Oh, it sounds like a real person. It did not back in what 2010 or whatever. So,
Yeah.
but the recordings are there. You know, maybe I'll update them someday. But what I'm using now for my synthetic voices is an application called Synthesizer V, which is Chinese instead of
Oh yeah. Oh,
Japanese.
I've seen that. It does have like a lot more um, realism to it, but I have heard of Synthesizer V. So you've had success for it. So I'll take your recommendation, man, when I go and use it. So that's good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, being a solo musician, being, really loving digital technology and innovations when it comes to music, since the advent of Vocaloid so long ago, I've been very excited to keep studying that stuff, see, what people are trying to do, where Vocaloid's going. At some point, it seems to me anyway that Vocaloid they found their niche, right? And the fans like that particular digital sound. And
Right.
if they were to make it any more realistic than that, it wouldn't be Vocaloid anymore. And that's not really what I was going for, right? Like there's still a use for that. I like things that sound strange, but for vocals for the most part, I like a more natural sound. I don't want to be jarring all the time. So yeah, Synthesizer V seems to be the top of the line right now. But yeah, let's see. You were asking about the learning curve, and yeah, it's fortunately Synthesizer V. The interface and the tools are designed to be very similar to Vocaloid. I think the idea, right, was they wanted to make it as easy as possible to transition from the bigger name product. So I had already, really, figured out all of the controls and stuff. But it is, there's kind of a technical aspect to it. The interface is really streamlined and clean, but we also really need to know how vocals work, right? So fortunately, the one instrument that I am confident actually, performing and not, just like telling a computer to do is my own voice. So there's a lot of, tinkering with the software. Why doesn't this voice sound right? Sing it myself. Oh, because I'm trying to do something, that it isn't really,
Right.
how I had it in my head. So yeah, a lot of that is, sing it myself to figure out the style and then try to get the software to match that as far as like dynamics or like, trills and things like
And it
that.
really works with the female vocals too. It adds its own like energy to it. And I really like it. It's like you're going on like your own journey and it's like kind of take my hand sort of thing. And all the tracks seem to be kind of inspired one way or another, like you said, by that synesthetic approach. Like when I listen to it, I think of those black and red sort of tones. I like to kind of, when I listen or even make music, like think of one color scheme and try to shape the music like around the color scheme. So that's really cool.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it works for more people than just me. It's yeah, it being kind of an abstract way of doing it, and it was an interesting way. It was a fun way for me to create kind of a structure to an album that I still wanted to be very diverse.
hmm And yeah, like the vibes I got from Solari Luz it's like a kind of a Castlevania sort of vibe too,
Mhm.
like in the intro, and then it's
Yep.
like very kind of rock driven. There's a lot of like power chords while still incorporating those kind of folk elements to it. It's really like I can think of like immersion in like a video game, like a Game Boy Advance game.
Yeah, and I love that. Like I said, yeah, my original inspiration was all these fantasy, old video games, right? 8-bit, 16-bit video games. So yeah, and I never let go of that influence. I like, like with a lot of those composers, right? The idea was to make something that is interesting enough, but not too wild that you can loop it and it doesn't get, it doesn't start to grate on the listener. And they would often do that by having, more of a complex arrangement. It's kind of hard to call it progressive when it just keeps looping over and over and over again.
Yeah,
But, like there's like multiple bridges or whatever you want to call them that
right.
just keep building and building and then dropping. And that's whenever I'm sitting there scratching my head, like how do I want to arrange this song? That's always one of the things I try. It's like, well, what would the Japanese RPG composers do?
In that instance, right?
Yeah.
And the hit single of sorts, like at least between my brother and I, is
Hit isn't too strong a
Gloricia.
word, I think. But yeah, the
Gloricia. I
catchy.
remember you
Yeah.
were so annoyed at him, like singing that. Like after a while, you were like, okay.
I know that someone had told me that they had the key to unlocking my memory. I will seek out and contact.
But it
I
really
love it
is
too.
like that catchy, man.
Yeah. That's definitely one of those songs where yeah, like it'll, I feel like I'm tired of it, because I've heard it so many times. And like I said, it's pretty old, the original writing. But every time I throw it on, I'm like, oh yeah, I love this one. Maybe I am a genius.
But like, when other people love it, you can understand why Will loves it.
Yeah. No, it still hypes me up, even though, I was there for every step of the engineering and all of that. That one makes me feel pretty dang good.
Yeah, it really is like a cool song, and I can imagine like a music video for it, and to some degree, even just like a lyric video would be like that. Really is like the thing. It has like that single potential.
I'll take your word for it. I don't know anything about making stuff popular.
If you were to push the album with a singular song that would sell everybody on it, Gloricia would be the one.
Yeah, and that was my intuition, but I'm glad to get a second opinion.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously there are more like kind of detailed tracks. One of the longer ones is Mercer Magic, and like I feel like that one has like the most build up because you don't get that much like action until like the later part of the song. And like I found that was like really cool, especially because you have all these like clashing sounds, and then it gets to that one, and you're like, wait, the pacing on this is a little different.
Dancing in the twilight, feeling the hearts are trying to see my heart's waves within shadow. Forever become.
Yeah, there were definitely a lot of moments, with where I was considering that there just might be too many dang verses in that song. But because like melodically, right? You listen to the instrumental of it, it seems kind of repetitive. And I did a lot of work to spice that up, make them a little different every time, add in some little interlude bits to introduce some surprises there. But I don't know. I like the lyrics. There's a lot to say on that particular philosophical subject, and yeah, and then too, right? Like you say, since I do really like a lot of diversity in a single song, but across an album as well. Just having that very different structure to that one. At the end of it, yeah, I went with it because it felt good to have something that was kind of a surprise in the greater arrangement. It was just styled differently overall.
And I like in the latter part of the album, there's that track Difference. I feel like each instrument eventually gets its own like kind of solo time to shine. It's interesting how that works. It's like by that point, it's like, you know, the guitars and then the supporting kind of elements, like each have like solo time. You're so used to them being in the background, but that one was different too. It was a difference in a sense.
Yeah, and that's one of those other things that yeah, I definitely while composing, I'll pause and go, well, I know that all these instruments are layered together, but the regular listener might not hear them all, and that might be kind of unfortunate because I put a lot of work into designing this saxophone tone. So yeah, they're I don't know, like yeah, I've always loved, like I guess probably what got me started, practicing it this way would be dream theater and how there's these huge sections and songs that are kind of a battle between this solo guitar and solo keyboard. Um, so that's a way to like Jordan Rudess, right, to really bring out his cool synthesizer tones. So that's probably what was my earliest inspiration for doing that sort of thing. And Dream Theater too, they would do stuff where like all this crazy stuff is happening, and then drop out silence, and then there'd just be like this weird little like honky tonk piano bit instruments. Then it'd go back and guitars and drums and everything. And as a little kid, I thought that was just absolutely wild. And I find that I'm still, kind of doing that same sort of thing now, just to call attention to some of the more unconventional instruments that I had a lot of fun articulating.
Yeah. And then the penultimate track is Twist. And like I thought of it somehow, like I don't know, but from just listening to your music, I thought back to I Can Twist Too, and I was like, wait, was that pure coincidence or was that like intentional?
I've seen evil embrace their madness, the salons to reach genius. I too was once there.
Nah, that one's a coincidence. Yeah. Yeah, and like the way I name songs, and I don't know if this question's coming in or not, but my mind's already going there. A lot of the time, they start out as instrumental songs, and you gotta name your project. And with some of them, I would just like throw weird syllables together, which is how you get a difference or a Eindringen or something like that. Other times it would just be words like twist, and sometimes I end up changing them, right? Like with the out of the lyrics, I'll be like, oh, it'd really be, a lot more eye-catching or more suitable to just name the song this line from the refrain or whatever. But other ones, I'm like, nah, I'm attached to the goofy name I made up for the project file. I'm keeping it. And yeah, Twist was one where like, yeah, it was just the name of the project file. And then while writing the lyrics, I was like, now how do I incorporate, what, the meaning of the word twist into these lyrics? So I work backwards in that sense.
That's really cool. And you mentioned project file names. Funny story. I've had like plenty of those instances where I'm like, I would just like bullshit on the file names. But there were some instances, like I've interviewed Kurt Travis, who was on the first, incarnation of Dance Gavin Dance. He had this file called Easy Peasy, and then that became the name of the track. And then Andrew Salazar, the last guy or one of the last guys that I interviewed, um, he had this track going on for the new album that they're putting out, and that his band Danella Drive's putting out, and the file name is called Mars Death. Like it's like Megadeth and Mars Volta mixed together.
Actually,
So-
I watched that interview earlier this week. I thought that was hilarious. I like that. Oh, so I'm not the only one who does shit like that.
Yeah. Oh, you watched some of my interviews. Oh, that's cool, man.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's cool because like it just goes to show that every musician has that sort of process in mind. Like whether it's like, you know, incorporating this whole mess of like spontaneous styles or just like weird file names too.
Yep. Yeah. One of Will's favorite stories for me is on the album "I Can Twist Too," the very last track, which I believe I meant to pronounce Herford Siashio.
Yeah.
He asked me once, years and years ago, what were you thinking? That's such a bizarre name. And I'm like, I'm going to level with you, buddy. I hit the keyboard. I just went boop with the keyboard and then removed the numbers and added in some vowels so it was pronounceable and called it good.
Yeah, and you mentioned Herford Sasha, and I think that track is also like a more like pronounced statement of like all of those kind of carnival-ish influences. That one is a lot more in your face.
Yeah, and yeah, much darker kick too. I was just like distorted the kick, threw some reverb on it, distorted that, so it's got a not noisier, like thicker body because of that.
When you're going through these projects, do you listen to a lot of bands as much as you're creating music, or are you strictly devoting time to the creation process and then listening to music is something that you leave kind of, you know, on a far off corner?
No, I'm always listening to music. I'm very much a collector of music, metal in particular. Like people I know, they're always saying, "Oh, you got to listen to this new band," or "Did you hear so and so release this new album? They were defunct for a while." Da da da. And yeah, very much, like allow the influence to come in. You got to be careful sometimes, right? Because there are times where I'm like, I don't, I feel like I'm in the mood now, and I sit down and I start writing, and I'm accidentally, recomposing somebody else's work. Like, oh, whoops.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, such a thing as being too close to what you were just listening to. But yeah, as wild as the style of Red Ankh in particular has become, to me, it's very much just like a remixing of all of my influences. May take a moment for me to to answer where did this one particular song's influence can't come from, because it'd probably be so varied. But I'm sure if you gave me enough time, I could list like the 12 bands that influenced Deep Francis or whatever. But yeah, and there's a lot of stuff too where it's like it might influence the writing but not the style. Like I listen to a lot of neo-folk and like industrial dance music, synth pop stuff that that you might not really pick up on in a lot of the songs, or like Infected Mushroom, that psychedelic trance band that don't really even do psytrance anymore because they dabble in a lot of stuff. They have a guitar player. They influence me a lot, but in a much more like subtle way. Like I don't use quite so many like modulating synthesizers with a lot of I don't know, just like a lot of modulation across all of the different features of the sound. I would like to use more of those, but it just doesn't come as naturally to me. But just their particular energy and their own like wildness to the way they write is always there somewhere.
And then the last track, Clear Skies, on the Red album by Red Ankh. Did you intend for that to be the finale?
I did. Once the song really started coming together, yes. And that's one of two songs that I wrote more recently. That one and the little instrumental track in the middle, Sunshine, are the new songs on it that I started a couple of years ago. And that one, yeah, really what was going on is, I was thinking about the whole album as it was really coming together while I was, finally finishing it, doing all the vocals. And I was just wondering, like, do I want it to end the way it does? Is there anything in here? Would the arrangements sound better if another song, broke up these two? And that's what that track was for. Is it didn't feel like it ended correctly for me. I wanted it to go out differently. So I wrote that song. And as I was building it with the structure, it was specifically, this is going to be a finale track.
Yeah, I feel that it encapsulated that very well. And especially since it's, that long with that sort of involvement, like by this time you're primed, you're engrossed in the music to really say like, okay, it's going at this pace, and by this time it's a much more kind of enjoyable ride, but because by this point you had like accustomed to a lot of these influences. So yeah, it makes sense why this, and effectively the sky's clearing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thematically, like the album deals with a lot of, difficult stuff. And so I wanted the Red album though to be more, encouraging, uplifting, right? Like facing problems with solutions. And, that song at the end there, it's the way it feels, of course, but then also the way it's written, lyrically, it's very much, things are going to be okay, right? Like it's kind of a fanfare in that way.
Yeah. You talk about also on your Facebook accelerationism, and it's about like essentially hitting rock bottom in order to progress in a very demonstrable way. And did you experience that personally, musically or otherwise, as far as like kind of clearing your mind and like kind of getting back into focus?
Interesting question. First of all, I just want to say that obviously with, I know the post you're talking about.
Yeah.
Accelerationism, like politically is not at all something I endorse. Let's be clear. I don't want to smash society to rubble and then rebuild. That's way too destructive and dramatic.
But for a personal connection, like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely hit points in my life where, I felt the need to restructure myself, to look at, in my work to, be like, okay, I've been, just kind of going on momentum here, going on maybe perhaps, misplaced self-esteem here, let's try to be a little more objective, consider criticisms, all these things. I don't know if I could pick out, any particular moment in my life or like what drove it, but,
sure.
But my music, especially, the Red album is a lot about, lyrically, it's about, hitting different kinds of rock bottom. It ties into my writing, whereas, there was this big disaster that occurs in the main storyline, and the people, they survive, they come out the other end, but they don't know what to do next because they've lost everything. So a lot of the songs are about, how to rebuild, how to know who you are, when you feel like you've lost who you are. And that does, yeah, personally resonate with me, because I've hit that a lot, where I was like, oh, well, I thought I was this and I don't really like who that was anymore. And so we got to change. But where do you begin if you have to let go of all your values, or a lot of your values anyway? So yeah, it'd be hard to like bring up just an example or a key moment, because I feel like that's kind of something I've been doing for years now. You come across a new revelation and you're like, well, this has implications for much of the way I live my life. What do I do?
And you look back and you're like, yeah, I've definitely like grown so much. I'm like so much, wiser than the kid that I once was.
Yeah, and it's good, but it can be painful, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
hard to
scary,
get.
man.
Yeah, and it's hard to get support through that, right? Because I don't know, at least from my perspective, I've noticed our culture, you're kind of encouraged to use your childhood to figure out who you are, your teenage years to figure out who you are, and then kind of by mid-20s you've developed a personality, and then you're just supposed to maintain that for the rest of your life, right? Or else you're being fickle or two-faced or wishy-washy or something. And that just isn't really fair. I mean, we don't even know what's going on out there, even in our 20s. A lot of the time the world is a very complicated place, and if you hit a brick wall somewhere, you got to be able to pick yourself up and go in a different direction. And if people aren't encouraging you, supporting you, to reshape your life, you're going to have a bad time, unless you're born into wealth, of course.
Yeah, but it speaks to kind of what you know now, and the energy that you continue to put out there.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. And yeah, it's kind of just kind of going with the flow of it, with my music. But since you framed it that way, thinking about Red Ankh in particular, I can see it now. Yeah, there's a lot of moments where I felt stuck with something. The quality just isn't where I want it to be. There's definitely the moment, right, where I'm like, dude, I gotta stop using Vocaloid. It's so cheesy. But I like having other vocals. Like I've never had success really having somebody dedicate to recording vocals for me. But I also but sometimes it's like, well, who cares? I really like doing all the work myself. It's really satisfying. So do I give up until there's better tech? Do I use Vocaloid in a different way? What do I do? And so yeah, there was a period of time where I was very minimal use of the Vocaloid, unless it was a passage that could be presented more naturally. Yeah, until Synthv started rocking it, and I was like, oh, I think I'm going to keep doing what I was doing. But with the intent, right? The intent really be deliberate, right? In what sounds natural, what sounds strange, instead of just having it leaning into it sounding strange because there wasn't another option.
Yeah. And considering the musical journey you've had thus far, learning things straight away from your stubbornness, from your intuitiveness, taking that all in, and your present endeavors with Red Ankh and everything in between, what have you learned about yourself? Not only as a musician, but as a person.
Yeah, so I guess what that process taught me is that in a lot of ways, I've at least in the definitely in the past, I've had this confidence that that I could just go with my gut, right? That I knew better, and whatever I came up with would have to be right, because I'm a morally superior person. How could I fail? And that's, I keep retempering that over time. But that definitely, happened with the music. And what's interesting though, is because of that, like, overconfidence in the beginning, I was able to develop a style for myself that needed to be, tempered with knowledge, but is still there. And the confidence to throw, different influences together, to experiment, and, just like take all my favorite things of the week and throw them in a blender and see what happens, right? Like, that never went away. And, despite what I've learned, and So it still ends up being, you know, in long term, that boldness, right? Of I can do it because I'm me and I'm special, you know. That it really did pan out, you know, after being tempered with some actual knowledge of the art form. Because yeah, there is a certain, you know, amount of Red Ankh is obviously that is relatively unrestricted still. That, you know, that makes it not only feel very much like me instead of just like a job I do, but also, you know, I'd like to think makes it pretty dang unique.
Lastly, anything you'd like to say to your fans?
I have fans.
Yep.
No, I mean, yeah, with I mean, it's a very personal project, right? Red Ankh and my dance music, very personal stuff. It's all passion work. So anybody who loves it, right? Like it does feel like I'm, you know, connecting in a more personal way, right? It's not just a product that I've made. It's not about the money. I'll probably never be a career musician. So, you know, deep gratitude, and also, you know, you see me, I see you, right? Because this is the way my essence or whatever sounds, and you seem to get it. And I love that.
Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. This has been awesome. I know Will would
Yeah.
love this.
I've had a lot of fun. I love talking about my passion projects. So thank you.
There he goes.
He told me he was going to do that. I wasn't sure if he was kidding or not.